Well, I learned this morning about Nice, and I see this as yet another example, like a critical fever or something, telling us that socially we must make change. 4 times in my life I've been involved with changing history. And I pay close attention to those things. The 50s and 60s, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. My main function as a teenager was to get arrested. I spent a lot of time in drunk tanks in southern cities. In the 70s, I was the principal spokesperson, or writing words for the principal spokesperson on the transformation of the American military from the League's conscription organization to an all-volunteer meritocracy. In the 80s, it was citizen diplomacy. A group of citizens through the Stephan Institute in Big Sur, California, decided to create back channels that would allow Soviet and American officials and poets and doctors and psychologists to speak to one another in a off-the-record setting. And through all of that, the consciousness revolution that is the source of this meeting. I've been a consciousness researcher for almost 50 years as an experimentalist, and I've paid close attention to this role of consciousness and this interconnectedness and interdependence. And about 16 years ago, I got interested in seriously looking at how do individuals and small groups change the arc of history to a compassionate and life-affirming direction. And over those 16 years, I've explored in considerable depth about 200 social transformational movements, dating from the colonial American period up to about 2014. I was looking for, are there commonalities in these efforts that could give us instructions of how we might be able to create the kind of compassionate and life-affirming change that is so essentially needed. And as I did that, I discovered that there were 8 patterns of behavior that seemed to be common to all of these social transformational movements. They were not at all what I thought. When I got started, I thought, if you want to have a successful transformational movement, you need to know how to raise funds from people. Or you need to know how to get volunteers, that kind of thing. And it turns out that isn't at all what's important. The 200 movements that I looked at, what they taught me was that there were 8 fundamental principles that all successful social transformational movements work out amongst themselves. That's the first thing. And the second thing was that, actually 3 things. The second was that nonviolent change is 75% of the time successful, whereas violent change is only successful 25% of the time. And equally important, violent change is not enduring. I mean, you can look at the rise and fall of National Socialism in Germany, lasted between 10 and 20 years. Communism in the Soviet Union lasted 73 years. So these great monolithic military powers that you thought would last forever actually didn't last very long at all. The 8 laws are things like the individuals individually and the group collectively must form a common intention. Now that sounds really simple, except that if you have ever been on a committee for a school or a library or a church, you know it's not easy to get everybody on the same page about common intention. Another one of the laws is you must be willing to do the work even though you're not going to get credit for it. And I learned this from the abolitionists who talk about this, and particularly from the Quakers. There is probably no other single group of people, at least in American history, who have been so powerfully effective in creating compassionate, life-affirming change as the Quakers. Today, there are less than 87,000 Quakers in the United States. In the whole course of American history, from the colonial period forward, there are less than 1 million, actually probably less than about 500,000. And yet, if you look at every major social transformational movement in American history, dating back to the colonial period, you will see that it begins with a small group of Quakers. Abolition, public education, women's suffrage, the environmental movement, nuclear freeze, prison reform, all of those began as little tiny groups of Quakers, none of whom any of us can name. And one of the other principles is you cannot do something and expect it to come out. You can have a goal, but not a cherished outcome. The abolitionists would say, I don't know how slavery is going to end, but it is a moral evil, and I'm going to work for it, even though it may not happen in my lifetime. That's another one of the laws. But I am committed to its occurrence. I just don't know how it's going to work out. So you can have a goal, but not a cherished outcome. Another one of the big ones that turned out to be important was that your private self and your public personality must be one and the same. We can all imagine all the spiritual leaders and political leaders and other authoritative figures who present one kind of public persona and in their private moments are quite different people, and inevitably they implode. And there are reasons involving non-local consciousnesses why that happens. And fundamentally, right at the end of this research, and I looked at, as I say, a little over 200 social transformational movements around the world. I was particularly focused on the United States because I'm an American and I'm very concerned about my country, but I looked at the whole world. And the final takeaway that I got, and that I will leave you with in this, is what I call the Quotidian Choice. I recognized as I went through this movement, these movements, and I looked at all the neuro and social research that has been done about this, studying also how many people it would take to make a social movement successful. Well, it turns out 10%. When 10% of any cohort shift in consciousness, the whole cohort changes. And I could give you examples of this, but I don't want to go on too long. But the key to it all is this quotidian choice issue. And that is this, and I will give it to you, and I will tell you that if the people in this room will commit to this, just this little discipline, we can change the world in a compassionate and life-affirming way. It seems improbable because we have no army, we have no political position, we have no great wealth, but nonetheless, I guarantee you this works. And I can present you with lots and lots of evidence of this. And that is this. Every day you make hundreds of little choices. You go into the store to buy a toothpaste tube. You go to a gas station to buy gas for your car. You buy cat food, whatever, dog food. Every time you are presented with a choice, first of all, be aware that you are doing it. Most people are not aware that they make hundreds of choices every day. They just do it because it's the rote activity that they do. Be aware that you're making a choice. Of the options that are available to you, and none of them may be good options, but inevitably one of them will be better than the others. Of the options that are available to you as you understand it in that moment, you consistently choose the one that is the most compassionate and life-affirming, as you understand it, as you make that decision. Be aware you're making decisions. Consistently choose the one that is the compassionate and life-affirming option of the choices available to you. Tell 10 people that you are doing this, that you have made this commitment. Invite them to join with you, and in turn ask 10 of their friends to join with you. Now you just do the math. If we have 50 people in this room, then we have 500 people, then we have 5,000 people, then we have 50,000 people, then we have 500,000 people, 5 million people. And you can see how a little group like the Quakers, who are so numerically small that most Americans have never met a Quaker, couldn't name them, never heard the word, except maybe they heard Quaker, maybe Society of Friends, wouldn't recognize it, can't name anybody. This tiny little group of people, because they worked these 8 principles out and have been living them for several hundred years, have had more social, transformational, compassionate effect than any other group of people I have been able to discover. And I would just leave you with this final thought. Just before he was assassinated, Gandhi was asked by a reporter who went up to see him at his ashram. "Oh, Gandhiji," he said, "my editors want to know, how were you able to force the British to leave India? How did you get one of the most powerful nations on the planet to abandon its crown jewel of empire? They had been here almost 300 years. How did you force them to leave?" I think that's the universe telling us to pay attention to this. And Gandhi's answer illustrates the point I want to make, and that I will leave you with. And that is, he said, it was not what we did that mattered, although that mattered. It was not what we said that mattered, although that mattered. It was the nature of our character that led the British to choose to leave India. This group, just as people present, if we would adopt this idea of the quotidian choice, these little daily mundane choices, and we would always choose the compassionate and life-affirming one, and that we would ask our friends and family to join us purely voluntarily. I'm doing this, would you like to join me in doing this? And would you like to ask 10 of your friends to do this? We, with common intention, there is no force on earth greater than the collective intention of individuals working in concert. Thank you.